This video demonstration is going to be for a hip flexor stretch. So for anyone who doesn't know, the hip flexors are the muscles. There's a couple of them, but primarily the ones that we're going to be looking at are the muscles that cross over from your low back here, over top your pelvis, and onto the This video demonstration is going to be for a hip flexor stretch, also known as a couch stretch. You'll see why here in a second. For anyone who doesn't know, the hip flexors are a group of muscles that cross over the fronts of your hips that are responsible for flexion of the hip or bringing your knee up, think like marching. So a few of these muscles cross over from your low back, over top your pelvis, and onto the fronts of your thighs here. And again, responsible for this. However, given that humans, especially now, spend a lot of time in this seated position, what tends to happen is that these muscles kind of take on the length that they spend a majority of their time in. So if these muscles are shortened whenever they bring my knees up, so if I spend a lot of time sitting, whether I'm working at my desk at work or school, they spend a lot of time in this position, they're naturally going to shrink to kind of meet that length just to be at a more comfortable, so to speak, position, right? It's just the same thing if you were standing up. Bad example. Stupid. This video demonstration is going to be for a hip flexor stretch. So your hip flexors are a group of muscles that primarily cross over your hip here. They're responsible for bringing your knees up as if in marching. So humans tend to spend a lot of the time in a seated position at a desk, sitting in a chair, sitting on the couch. And what tends to happen is that the muscles that are responsible for that hip flexion or bringing those knees up, they acclimate to the length that they tend to be in. So if they spend a lot of time in this shortened position here, like I'm sitting, what's going to happen is that they're going to shrink, not a lot, but they're going to tend to stay at that length that they spend the most time in. So what happens is that in a standing up position, when these muscles are short, that's going to shift your hips forward like this. So it's a very minute movement. I'm hoping you guys can see it on the camera, but we call this an anterior or front pelvic tilt. What this does, it puts a lot of strain on your low back. It contributes to a variety of issues and insufficiencies. All of that not being important. What is important is the actual exercise demonstration. So let's get into that. I'm going to show you guys 3 variations of it. I recommend having a mat for this. It's very uncomfortable to do without a mat or carpet or something like that. So highly recommend it. I have my pretty pink yoga mat here. And all I'm doing is dropping on one knee, putting the other foot out in front of me, a little bit past 90 degrees angle on this knee here. And we're going to stretch this muscle. All we're going to do, push that front knee straight forward. That hip is going straight down towards the floor, just like this. So when I do that, I feel that tension kind of pulling through here. If I want to amplify that stretch a little bit, I'm going to squeeze my butt on this side. The reason for that, your glute muscles are hip extensors as opposed to hip flexors. So they forcing that extension a little bit by squeezing our glute. I'm going to stretch that a little bit deeper. Now, if you guys really want to get into a deeper stretch here, a way that you can do this is when you're in that position, you could take this arm on a downside knee and reach up and kind of lean away from it. The reason for that is that your psoas muscles, which are kind of the ones that we're talking about here, they go through your midsection and attach to your spine, kind of going up towards the middle of your back. So when you do this and you reach out, you're stretching the spine out from that side. That's really putting a lot of tension on those hip flexors. That's advanced. For most of you, starting out especially, you're really going to feel a lot of stretch just from leaning forward without even squeezing your butt. but just something to keep in mind as you kind of progress a little bit. Now, a progression of that to get it a little bit deeper, another part of your hip flexors actually cross over both your hip and your knee, right? Right. I asked you that like you know. I know. Now you do. To stretch that out a little bit deeper, we're going to put one foot on an elevated surface, and now we're going to incorporate a knee bend into that stretch as well. So this is just putting a little bit more pull. This is less on that high hip flexor and more on the lower stuff, kind of the quad muscle almost feels like. Same position though, foot's out in front of me, and I'm driving that hip down towards the floor, and that is an extremely deep stretch now because I'm really pulling across the whole thigh as well as the hip flexor, squeezing my butt, making everything tight there. That is a super deep stretch. I always recommend people do that multiple times a week. Honestly, I do it before every single workout. And even on non-training days, I usually go through a morning mobility routine just to kind of loosen up after a week of training. I'm going to do those every time in some variation. So guys, that is a couch stretch or a hip flexor stretch. I didn't really get into it. I call it a couch stretch sometimes because you can do this anywhere, whether it's with an office chair, a recliner, a couch. Elevating your foot on that is a great way to amplify it. Go stretch your hip flexors.